Welcome back to another session. I hope you are well. In the session that I covered previously, I made reference and I discussed the whole idea about potential and what we can achieve and do as humans. In today's session, I want to talk about duties, and depression. Um, my observation, generally speaking, whenever I come across any incidents of depression or incidents of depression expressed in the form of, you might say, suicide or um, some self harm or harm to other people, is is it possible that there's been an absence of duties in this individual and in their lives? We have in the West, especially since the 1950s, certainly after the Second World Wars, raised four plus generations of people who were told that you have no duty except that to yourself. And the duty to yourself is all about pleasure. And so what we have done is we've created people, but we build them on the foundation pads that are feeble. The great writer talks about two men, one wise, one not so wise, building their house, one on the sand, the other on the rocks. And in the good weather, the sun is out, shining, it looks great. Both houses stay up. And the true test is usually during moments of uncertainty. And when the uncertainty came, the one built on the sand, obviously had no foundations, or had weak foundations, and unfortunately was destroyed. Whereas the one built on the rocks, because the foundation stones and pads were safe and secure, it withstood the elements. A lot of people do not have a foundation stone and a safe, secure one under which they have actually created or built their lives. And especially those who suffer from depression, there seems to be this, in my opinion, correlation between an absence of duties and the presence of depression. Now, let me expand on that briefly. And I will say this will be a short session because I think the topic in itself of duties is self-explanatory. What are your duties to yourself? What are your duties to your family? What are your duties to your community, your nation, your country? What are your duties to a transcendental being? Some people call it God, and they call that God by different names: Allah, Buddha, Jehovah, or Christ, whatever it might be. What are your duties? Do you have any? Do you believe any of those duties are worthy of bearing? I have found in the West, and I say this particularly about the West because this is the one place where we've thrown away all of our great inheritances. We don't think that the sufferings and the duties that of people who came before us meant anything. Now, as a matter of fact, here is a very stark observation. We celebrated D-Day a week or thereabout ago, and amongst the younger ones, only about 25% of younger people, and by younger people, we're talking about millennials, late millennials, Gen Z, Generation Alpha, only about 25% of people even understood what D-Day stood for. Most people have been conditioned and raised not to recognize the sacrifices and the duties that were fought for and sacrifices made by people who came before. A lot of these people have also been raised around the whole concept of solipsism, where it's all about how you feel. And as we can see, the same group of people are the ones who are suffering the most from depression. And my question is, do you have any duties? And do you think that depression could be a symptom of a lack of duties in your life? A duty to yourself, a duty to others, a duty to something above you, something at the apex of, what you consider to be a hierarchy of values. If you have duties, and one of those duties, or a lot of those duties, are reflected around what I consider to be the seven virtues, or the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. But if you extend that to the seven virtues, you start talking about things like chastity, and abstinence, and temperance, patience, and diligence, and humility, and kindness. What you tend to find is, if you accept that there are duties you have, one of the duties to self will be never to see things as bad as or worse than they really are, and to have some grace and self-love to yourself. I have been stunned at how much and how poorly people talk about themselves. When we talk about other people, we can use lovely words, we can use big words to describe greatness in other people. But when we talk to ourselves or about ourselves, we cannot even find one word to describe something good about ourselves. And that's partly because we don't believe that there's a responsibility we have to ourselves, or we have a duty to ourselves. And you see this escalate across both family and community and nation and more. We have no duty to a religion, to a sect. We have no duty to a code of conduct, ethics. We have no duty to morality or integrity. We have no duty to a philosophical or principles that we live our life by. Why? Because most of us have been raised to see pleasure, happiness, joy in self as the ultimate good and God. And therefore, we have no duties. And so most people suffer with depression simply because depression in itself sometimes can be communicating back to you that there is an absence of the fruits of the Spirit in you. I find it fascinating, and also find it very perplexing that when you find people who are dutiful in their duties, those actually who work for something beyond themselves, a magnificent obsession, a purpose-driven life, a call to an adventure of life, they've picked up a cross, and in the suffering, they still see that duty. They don't suffer from depression. Why? There's something bigger than them. Their duties are much more than their suffering. As a matter of fact, these people think of their duties as more transcendental and their suffering as more temporary. In other words, I'm suffering, I have no food, but that's okay because hope comes in the morning. And I will carry on helping the people who have nothing, because that is what I'm called to do. That is part of my purpose. That is part of my potential. That is part of my why. That is part of my joy. There's a duty. And this is part of the reason why some of the great writers would always say, in order to find yourself, you're going to have to lose yourself. You're going to have to lose yourself in something better, bigger than you. It cannot be about you. I use the reference that if you suffer from depression, you're very likely bored. Because if you're busy with life and enjoying life and embracing all the things that life has to offer, even with all of its drudgery and broken promises, that you will find that being busy means you don't have time to sit back and think about self and your suffering and feelings. It's boredom is the breeding ground for depression. Most people are bored. The focus on self, the embracing of the 7 deadly sins, where you start to develop greed or envy or some lustful attitude. And lust is not simply a sexual desire. It can be lust of what other people have that you do not have. It's not just sexual. It means a sense of lack or limitation, a desire, a controlling desire. And the more you pursue what you think you need, the more it takes you away from your true essence. So, for example, a fish can be lustful about being and walking with humans, and in pursuit of that lust, it realizes that the environment for which it was designed does not give it the same advantages as the environment for which it was not designed. And so suddenly it comes out of water and realizes, oh shit, my genius disappears. I'm struggling, I'm gasping for air, I'm going to die. And part of that reason might just be because they had lust and envy and wanted to be like humans. And a lot of people are trying to be like other people. Hence, the suffering that comes with that, the emotional uncertainty and turmoil that comes from not recognizing that you were special. You're not designed for everyone. You're not designed to work and be in everywhere. There is an environment for which you flourish. But in that environment, there is a duty that is placed on you for which your most fulfillment will come from choosing that duty, living in accordance with that duty, and taking life with all of its broken promises as it comes. Believing, nonetheless, that there is something, that there's a story that will be told at some point, and that story will end well. And that people will look at your life and your suffering and say, despite all of these sufferings, she overcame or he overcame. Now let me end today's session as follows. One of the greatest lines I ever heard goes as follows. I fought the good fight. I kept the faith. And I finished the race. I mean, that's powerful. It just simply says, yes, I suffered from depression. I cried every other night. I struggle with life and the meaning of life. Several times I thought about taking my own life. But I finished the race. And I kept the faith. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.